Thank you, Speaker. And to my colleague from Kingston, there's a lot of things we can agree on, particularly related to environmental justice and things like this. But legislation that I believe continues to promote a very dangerous narrative of xenophobia is not one of the things that I can agree on. When we think about the work that our local law enforcement agencies need to be prioritizing, it is the issues related to violence and crime. It's looking at ways to make our communities safer and working with our other institutions of government to do so. They are not intended to serve as ICE agents. That is not why they were designed or developed. And legislation after pieces of legislation are continuously being put forward by this body that perpetuate a very harmful narrative that is anti-immigrant and that is xenophobic and that is harmful. Part of that is because the information that folks are using is wrong. You use part of the notes about the millions of people who have come to our borders and are now a part of our country, but you fail to speak about Title 42 related to COVID-19, which was why there was a reduction in the number of people who would come and seek asylum in our country. People believe for some reason that previous presidents actually sent more people away. Under the previous administration, annually, about 80,000 people were sent out of our country, compared to roughly 33 to 35,000 a year by the Biden administration. It's not that substantially different. There are some real issues that we need to deal with to address the crises that we have for people who are seeking asylum and are seeking to make this place their home. But by telling our local law enforcement agents that they need to become tools of the federal government is not the appropriate response. One of the things that I read, Representative, in the fiscal note for this legislation that I think is important for all of us to understand are just a couple of things. One, law enforcement agencies do not currently keep any records of interactions with members of the public. It's unclear how a law enforcement officer is to know or determine the immigration status of any given individual with whom the officer interacts. Local law enforcement officers currently document reports of crimes and investigative activity solely. They continued in this related to your legislation based on information provided by the Tennessee Sheriff's Association. The only practical current method of determining a person's immigration status is to fingerprint the individual and send it to the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Local law enforcement officers do not have real-time access to ICE databases. It goes further and says, given these challenges, it's assumed that the legislation will require such reporting on interactions with individuals that are determined to be, quote-unquote, illegal through normal existing processes, namely in the process of investigating crimes. What this legislation seeks to do is currently impossible without interaction with ICE, which could only happen if a local law enforcement agency has a 270G memorandum of understanding. Again, the effects of this legislation are more in the messages that it sends that are anti-immigrant, the messages that it sends and that it supports about people who are from different countries seeking asylum and seeking to come to this country in need because of the problems that they are facing. It is turning them into some form of an enemy. And I hear, and Representative, you said this several times, you're worried about the crime that is being committed by people and folks being in harm's way. But I'm very deeply worried about the crime that is committed in our community by Tennesseans. I'm very worried about gun violence, and we've spoken about that before. I'm very worried about the issues that we do have in our community and want to see us prioritize the violence happening by white supremacists, the violence happening by people who should have access to weapons. I want us to prioritize those problems rather than turning people who are immigrants who do commit fewer crimes than people who are citizens, according to research done by Stanford University professors. I want us to prioritize those issues instead of sending these terrible and awful and hate-filled and vile signals to people who are immigrants in our communities. That is why I will not support this legislation and ask that you don't either.